Late January 2022, a polar vortex pushed overnight temperatures in Chicago down to -7 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill made it worse. Emergency shelters across the city were turning people away at the door, and on a sidewalk near Wicker Park, inside a decommissioned phone booth that looked like every other piece of forgotten street furniture on the block, a man named Edward Tomlin was reading a paperback by the dim red glow of a headlamp. The interior of that booth held at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. That is 41 degrees warmer than the air outside. His only heat source was his own body. His total construction cost was $26, and not a single person who walked past that booth on the coldest night of the year had any idea a human being was alive inside it. But to understand how a 51-year-old HVAC technician ended up building a survival shelter inside a phone booth on a Chicago sidewalk, you have to understand what he lost first. Because the same career that the world took from Edward Tomlin is exactly what kept him alive. Edward spent 22 years working as an HVAC technician for a commercial building services company in the Chicago suburbs. He understood airflow, insulation values, heat transfer coefficients, and vapor barriers the way a surgeon understands anatomy. He could walk into a failing heating system and diagnose the problem by feel. He had a one-bedroom apartment in Berwyn, a truck he kept maintained, and a routine that had not changed in over a decade. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., drive to the job site, spend 8 to 10 hours inside commercial buildings, making sure the air moved the way it was supposed to, then come home. It was not a glamorous life, but it was stable. And for 22 years, nobody told him it could disappear in a single phone call. Then, in 2020, his employer cut the maintenance division during a round of pandemic layoffs. Edward collected unemployment for 9 months while the industry contracted around him. When the checks stopped, his landlord in Berwyn did not. The eviction came 60 days later. He moved into his truck. When the truck was towed from a lot where he had been parking overnight, he moved onto the streets of Chicago with a duffel bag, a sleeping bag, and 2 decades of thermal engineering knowledge that was about to become the most valuable skill he had ever learned. He tried the shelters. The one in his area had a strict 7 p.m. curfew, which eliminated the intermittent day labor jobs he was picking up through a construction staffing agency. His tools, the ones from 22 years of HVAC work, had to go into a communal storage area where belongings disappeared overnight. He watched a man lose a $400 multimeter in his first 48 hours. The shelter gave Edward a bed for 10 hours and took away his ability to earn income and the only professional equipment he had left. He did the math. He walked out. That decision was not irrational. It was survival arithmetic, and the answer was clear. Edward started noticing things on the streets that other people walked past without a second glance. Decommissioned phone booths. There are over 100,000 of them still standing in American cities right now. Stripped of hardware, ignored by maintenance crews, walked past by thousands of pedestrians every day. What remains after the phone company walks away is a vertical steel and glass shell with a functioning door, 3 enclosed walls, and a roof. To everyone else, they were urban scrap. To Edward, with his background in thermal systems, they were something entirely different. He saw in an enclosed structure with a sealable envelope, a manageable air volume, and a geometry that could be engineered to trap heat. He saw a problem he had been solving professionally for over 2 decades. He spent 3 weeks walking streets in Wicker Park, Logan Square, and Humboldt Park before he found the right one. It had to meet 4 conditions. Fully enclosed, not the open-sided American style with just a shell and a handset. Structurally intact with working door hinges and unbroken glass panels. Located where pedestrian foot traffic dropped to near zero after midnight. And genuinely abandoned, with no functioning hardware, no sign of city maintenance visits, and visible grime that confirmed nobody had touched it in a long time. He found 2 booths in the first week that met 3 of the 4 criteria. One on a busy corner in Logan Square had intact glass and a working door, but a security camera on the building across the street pointed directly at it. The other, near Humboldt Park, was genuinely abandoned and well screened from foot traffic, but one glass panel had a crack running from top to bottom that would leak heat all winter. He kept looking. He found the right one on a Thursday evening in late October, a decorative British-style kiosk installed outside a restaurant that had closed permanently during the pandemic. The phone hardware had been removed. The electrical connection was dead. Bird droppings streaked the glass, and a thin film of city grime covered every surface. Nobody had opened that door in at least a year. Edward opened it that night and did not leave for 2 winters. Pay attention to what he did first, because it explains everything about why his system outperformed every other attempt at urban micro-shelter survival documented in any American city. Before Edward installed a single piece of insulation, before he addressed the glass or the cold, he sealed the envelope. Foam weather stripping around the doorframe, $4 at a hardware store. Silicone caulk along the base where the booth met the concrete sidewalk, another $5. Clear packing tape over every joint where glass panels met the steel frame. He spent $12 making that booth airtight. Any amateur would have started with blankets or insulation. Edward knew better. He knew that the biggest heat loss in any enclosed space comes from uncontrolled air leakage, not through the walls themselves. 22 years of fixing commercial HVAC systems had burned that principle into him permanently. A building with perfect insulation and leaky seams loses heat faster than a building with mediocre insulation and a tight seal. Only after the booth was sealed did he address the glass. A standard enclosed phone kiosk has glass panels on 3 sides and a steel frame. On a 15-degree night in January, those panels pull heat away from anything warm inside within minutes. The interior matches the outside air in under an hour. Sitting inside an unmodified booth at 2 a.m. in a Chicago winter is essentially sitting inside a glass refrigerator. Edward cut standard emergency Mylar blankets, the thin silver sheets sold at any dollar store for a couple of dollars each, to fit each glass panel, and taped them directly to the interior surface using clear packing tape. The Mylar does 2 things simultaneously. It reflects radiated body heat back into the interior, and it eliminates direct contact between warm air and the cold glass. A single layer reduces heat loss through a glass panel by roughly 40%. Edward added a second Mylar sheet spaced approximately half an inch from the first. That half-inch gap, barely wider than a pencil, changes the thermal performance of the entire enclosure. Trapped dead air between 2 reflective surfaces creates one of the most effective insulation barriers available, and it costs almost nothing. The same principle makes double-pane windows effective. The same concept that people living in storage units discovered independently with layered cardboard. The trapped air cannot circulate, so it cannot carry heat to the cold outer surface. One woman operating this identical system in a phone kiosk in Philadelphia measured the interior air temperature on a night when the outside reading was 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the double-lined booth, with no heat source other than her own body, the air held at 41 degrees Fahrenheit, a 23-degree differential created entirely by $8 worth of Mylar blankets and packing tape. Not comfortable by indoor standards, but the difference between survivable and lethal on a winter night in Philadelphia. What Edward did next is the part that still surprises the outreach workers who later heard about his setup. He understood a physics advantage built into the booth's shape that turns what looks like a limitation into an asset. A phone booth has roughly 9 square feet of floor space and about 60 cubic feet of air volume. A human body at rest generates between 80 and 100 watts of continuous heat. In a 10 by 10 room, That output spreads across 100 square feet and hundreds of cubic feet. The temperature rise is real, but modest. In a phone booth, that same body heat concentrates into a fraction of the volume, and it raises the interior temperature dramatically faster. The problem is physics working against you in one specific direction. Heat rises. In a 7-foot-tall booth, the warmest air collects at the ceiling, while the coldest air pools at floor level where you are actually sitting or lying down. Edward stretched a folded wool blanket horizontally across the interior at about 5.5 feet high, just above head height when seated. That fabric barrier captures the rising warm air and prevents it from reaching the cold ceiling panels, where it would lose its heat and cycle back down. Instead, the warm air pools just above the person's head and radiates downward. The effective living space shrinks from 60 cubic feet to about 35, but the temperature inside that reduced volume climbs significantly. But none of that engineering matters if somebody finds you, and this is where Edward's system separated itself from every other attempt at phone booth shelter documented across American cities, because a phone booth sits on a public sidewalk in plain view of every pedestrian, patrol car, and city maintenance worker who passes by. The advantage is the vulnerability. Everyone can see it. The entire survival system depends on making absolutely sure that nobody wants to look. Edward never cleaned the booth. That is not laziness. It is strategy. The grime, the bird droppings, the faded appearance of abandonment were his primary defense. A clean phone booth in a neglected neighborhood draws attention. A dirty one is invisible. He taped the mylar sheets to the inside of the glass panels, with the silver side facing inward, which from the outside appeared as nothing more than faded reflective film, indistinguishable from the sun-damaged privacy film that older booths often had installed years earlier. Nobody walking past would give it a second look. At night, he used no visible white light. A single red LED headlamp, the kind used by astronomers because red light is nearly invisible through glass from a distance, let him read and organize his space after dark without casting any glow visible from the sidewalk. His entry and exit timing followed a pattern built entirely around observation. Edward spent his first full week sleeping in a doorway across the street from the booth, watching foot traffic. Peak pedestrian activity on that block ran from roughly 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. The dead window fell between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. He entered the booth no earlier than 1:30 a.m. and exited no later than 4:45 a.m. During the day, the booth sat empty, looking identical to every other piece of forgotten street furniture on the block. Edward spent his daytime hours at the library, at day labor sites when work was available, and walking routes through the neighborhood that kept him moving without drawing attention. He carried a small backpack with his water containers, his headlamp, a change of clothes, and the microfiber cloth he used for washing. Everything he owned fit in that bag and a duffel stored inside the booth. He learned to move through the city the way the booth sat on the sidewalk. Present, but not worth noticing. He installed a simple interior latch, a $3 barrel bolt from a hardware store mounted to the inside of the door frame, where it was completely invisible from outside. If anyone tried the door during daylight hours, it felt stuck or jammed. They tugged once or twice and moved on within seconds. One night during his second winter, someone tried the door handle at 2 a.m. while Edward was inside reading. He turned off the headlamp. He did not move. The person pulled twice and walked away. That was the closest anyone came to discovering Edward in 2 years. If you have been finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every single week, and the next one is already in the works. I also put together a free guide called The Veteran's Blueprint with additional techniques and details that I cannot share in these videos without risking the channel. The link is in the description below. Edward's water system followed the same disciplined rotation that experienced survivors have refined across dozens of American cities. Two 1-gallon water containers were filled at the public restroom inside the Chicago Public Library branch on North Avenue during morning hours, a small collapsible water bag for daily carrying. He rotated between 3 sources: the library, a public park bottle filling station, and a fast food restaurant restroom during off-peak hours. The rule is the same one used by people surviving in storage units and shipping containers in cities across the country. Never draw from the same source more than twice in a single week. It avoids drawing staff attention and keeps the routine sustainable. His total weekly water cost was under $2, covering drinking, a daily wash with a microfiber cloth, and basic needs. There was one problem Edward understood that could have killed him. An airtight booth with a human body inside accumulates dangerous carbon dioxide levels within a few hours. Sealing the envelope was critical for heat retention, but a perfectly sealed space is a death trap. He drilled 2 small holes, each about the diameter of a quarter, one near the floor on the door side, one near the ceiling on the opposite wall. This created a passive convection loop. Cool outside air entered low, warmed as it rose past his body, and exited high. The exchange was slow enough to preserve the interior heat, but fast enough to prevent dangerous carbon dioxide buildup. He tested it by monitoring his own symptoms. If he woke with a headache, ventilation was insufficient. He never woke with a headache. A raised sleeping platform made from a wooden pallet he found behind a restaurant on Milwaukee Avenue eliminated ground conduction from the concrete sidewalk. 4 inches of separation between his body and the cold ground. The entire thermal conversion from sealed envelope to mylar liner to heat column to ventilation to platform cost him $26 in purchased materials. When all 4 components operated together, they produced something that none of the individual methods could achieve alone. The sealed envelope stopped air leakage. The double mylar liner defeated glass and metal conduction. The sealing fabric trap concentrated body heat in the living zone instead of wasting it against cold ceiling panels. And the camouflage protocol made the entire operation invisible to a city that walked past it every single day. During the polar vortex in late January 2022, when the outside temperature fell to -7 degrees, Edward recorded an interior temperature inside his modified booth of 34 degrees Fahrenheit, 41 degrees warmer than the air outside, using nothing but body heat, $26 in materials, and the thermal engineering knowledge he had spent 22 years accumulating in a career that the world had thrown away. He was discovered in March of 2022, not by police, not by a city inspector. The owner of the building adjacent to the booth noticed the weather stripping around the door one morning while walking his dog. The man stopped. He looked closer, then he knocked. Edward had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head. What to say, what to do, how fast he could pack if it came to that. He opened the door. The building owner looked at the mylar panels, at the raised pallet bed, at the neatly organized water containers and folded blankets. He looked at the wool ceiling trap and the sealed joints along the glass. He was quiet for a long time. He did not call anyone. He asked Edward if he was all right. Edward said he was. The man nodded, then left without saying another word. Edward assumed that was the end. He started packing that afternoon. But the man came back before sunset with a thermos of coffee and a business card for a transitional housing program run through a Chicago nonprofit. He told Edward he had looked up the program during his lunch break. Edward applied the next week. He was placed in a shared apartment 6 weeks later. The phone booth sat empty again. Within a month, the city came by and pulled it off the sidewalk during a routine street furniture cleanup. Nobody watching the crew remove it had any idea what it had been for the past 2 years. The knowledge behind these conversions spreads the same way all hard-won survival information moves through homeless communities, person to person, warming center to warming center, city to city. Outreach workers in Chicago have encountered people who can describe the Mylar liner technique in precise detail without ever having read a single word about insulation. They learned it from someone who learned it from someone who figured it out alone on a freezing night with nothing but a survival blanket and a roll of clear tape. A warming center volunteer in Philadelphia reported hearing the same dead air gap principle explained by 3 different people in the same winter, none of whom knew each other. The technique had traveled from wherever it started and arrived in that city fully formed, refined by everyone who passed it along. Edward Tomlin put it simply when he described what he had built. He said that for 22 years, the world paid him to keep buildings warm. Then the world decided it did not need him anymore, and he used the same knowledge to keep himself alive. The only difference was that nobody was signing the invoices. A home is not an address. A home is a space where you control the temperature, the airflow, and the door. Edward had all 3 for $26 and a phone booth the city had forgotten about. Subscribe if you want to see how people are turning forgotten infrastructure into shelter in cities across America right now. The video on screen goes deeper into a completely different survival system with methods every bit as creative as these. Click it and keep going.